My name's Jeff. Thanks for showing up. It's really nice to be here. I love this festival. Hey, how's it going?
Well, how are you?
Good. And it's nice to see people I know and people I don't know as well. So, yeah, thanks for coming. Yeah, talking about Japanese gates. We had the idea, well, Jason had the idea to do a Japanese gate class in the fall, which we have on the books for this fall. And then he said, well, why don't you come and talk about it a little bit at the festival? And I thought, oh, that sounds great. So let's do it. I would say there's as many, there's more gates in Japan than there are temples. Because for every temple, there's a bunch of gates. And then for every, not for every traditional house, but for many traditional Japanese houses, there are gates. And where there's a garden, of which there are a million, you'll find more gates. So I don't know, if you counted all the gates, they may be the most numerous type of structure in Japan. And I really love them. I love what they do, how they function, how they look. And also I like the kind of the scale of a gate. It's a nice little gem of a project. Of course, there are huge gates, but what I'm going to be talking about is smaller gates. And so in terms of project scale, it can be a really wonderful experience to do a gate because you can get very intricate with it. There's a lot of detail, as there is with even very simple Japanese structures like you see behind you. But at the same time, a gate is, for me, it's something I can digest pretty easily as a project. It won't take the next 3 years like a complicated house might. Yeah, so I'm in love with Japanese gates. The ones I want to talk about, there are so many different types that you would be familiar with. Basically, the style of gate would be what we would call showing style. That's just an architectural style that's probably the one most familiar to all of you here. A lot of what you see around you here, even though these are kind of specialty buildings, draws on showing style architecture from Japan. When people talk about the traditional Japanese house, they're usually talking about showing style homes. If you're at all familiar with books like this, which by the way is a great resource for you, everything in here is showing style. But the title is Measuring Construction of the Japanese House. That's how much showing style is identified just with traditional Japanese houses. So I want to talk about gates of that sort. Within the showing style of architecture, a kind of sub-category would be skya showing, which is T-inflected showing architecture. So we might talk a little bit about gates of that style too. Most of the gates, well, the gate that I have in mind, particularly, I'll get to this later. This is a drawing of the gate that we're going to build at the class, but gates like this would typically appear at a residence, at a Japanese garden. This one is based on another one that we did, which is the outer gate into tea house garden. So you find them, like I said, houses, Japanese gardens, sometimes tea gardens, which are a special type of Japanese garden. So yeah, focusing on these modest residential garden gates in the showing style. One thing maybe just briefly to talk about is how these things function in terms of people's experience of Japanese environments. And then we can look at sort of nuts and bolts parts and dimensions and sizes and treatments and so forth. So just a few words. These gates would appear where a pathway crosses a boundary into a distinct area within a larger precinct. And they function really importantly in visitors' experiences of that distinct place. And just briefly, the way I feel they do that is these gates, they signal that place as a place that you're about to enter. They let you know it's coming. But they also express that place. They're a part of that place. They're not just a void through which you move. They are a part of the place and help to define it. So they're part of the identity of the place on either side of them, actually. You know, sometimes in some gardens you would never exit through the same gate you entered through, just because it might be a stroll garden and there's a certain directionality to it. But you go both ways. So the gate helps to define outer and inner. It also helps to let you know when you're leaving a distinct place and entering a new place where a different type of posture or behavior or mindset might be more appropriate. And that's really, to me, the most important thing about these gates. I've had conversations with friends, and I say I'm building a gate, and they think of like a security apparatus of some sort. That's a type of gate, and there are plenty of gates in Japan of that sort. Gates like this can serve to protect a property from, they can serve to regulate visitors, let's put it that way. Keep out people at the right times and keep out the wrong sort of people and all of that. But to me, the most interesting role of these gates in our experience of them is not that they keep you out, but that they draw you in. That's to me one of their central functions, and to me the most interesting function. Part of the way they draw you in, as I said, is they express what's inside and make you curious to discover more. You want to see more of that vibe. This is a gate in Tiburon, California. This was done by Lenny Brackett. Jason will have walked through this gate. And I'm sorry that this doesn't show a little more detail in terms of brightness, but you can see, when I see a gate like this, I want to know about this garden in here. I want to discover that garden by strolling on this path. And to me, this is just, it's a welcoming and it's an invitation. It's an enticement. It says, come in and see more. And I think as the gate does that, it also sort of attunes you to what's coming. And in a sense, I feel like they protect the site by protecting its spirit and by attuning our character to the character of the site. So that's one of the things I love about these gates. Any just questions before we move on to kind of nuts and bolts stuff? Right on. So we'll look at a bunch of gates. Then we'll talk about this gate that we'll do at the class. So a type of gate I'm not going to talk about, by the way, is torii gates. Torii gates also serve to protect and sort of guard a place in terms of people's attitudes going into that place, but they specifically guard sacred places. So I've definitely had clients ask me for torii gates, and I talk to them more and see why they want one and where they want it to be situated. And on occasion, I try to talk them out of it. Usually try to talk them out of it, because the torii gate's a really specific religious structure with specific religious meaning. And there are definitely people who I've spoken with, and after talking to them, I feel like I'd be happy to build you a torii gate. The site is right. The person's approach to the whole situation is right. They want to honor well, as in Japan and in the Shinto religion, it would be about honoring sort of sacred place or sacred presences in a place. It's part of Japan's very interesting ancient animistic religion of Shinto. And so they are Shinto structures. And so I try to let people know that. Like what you're asking for is it would be like asking for a huge cross in your backyard or something. Like there's a lot of meaning that goes along with that. So I just want to, make sure people understand that and are on board with that and in tune with it. So there are, we'll see a few torii gates if you guys don't know what they are. Oh, we're going to be stuck again. I'm sorry. Well, here's just to catch up on our slides. Here's a bunch of gates that to me display this quality of drawing people in by revealing a little bit of what's inside, but also they also hide what's inside. You can't tell what's inside till you really pass through. So this is the famous gate at Todaiji, and right through there you can see the Daibutsu Den, where the largest brass Buddha, I think in the world, is housed. This is a famous site in Nara. This is not a showing style gate by any stretch. This is Daibutsu style, but it's magnificent and beautiful. It has deer. This is a gate at the Moss Garden, Kokadera in Kyoto. This takes you to the path, the mountain path. So there's a directional stroll that one would take up on the hillside. That one is also not a showing style gate. This one keeps going in and out of focus, so I'm going to skip it. This gate here was the basis for what we're doing here, which is different in ways that I'll explain. But this is an entrance. This is the what would be called a sotomon. It's the outer gate into a larger tea garden. And then inside of it, down the path a little ways, you find a chumon. Mon is gate. You find a chumon, which is a very modest, humble little bamboo gate that takes you to the heart of the tea garden, right before you would go in and partake of tea ceremony. That would be a little chumon or mid gate right before you get to the tea house. This is somewhere in Kyoto. There's another one here. This one was super wide because we needed wider access. But that's a little tea pavilion. You come through. This is part of the outer gate. You come through it on the path. You end up there. Then you would wash your hands in the laver. Torii gates that I was mentioning earlier. This indicates a sacred spot of kami or spirit or presence. Again, this is religious architecture. Another type of gate I won't talk much about has a special kind of structure. This is called a karamon. Has what was thought to be a Chinese shape to the roof here and to the gable end. It's probably not really Chinese. In fact, I don't think you find that in China at all, from what I understand. If anyone knows better, let me know. But we won't talk about this kind of... The ornateness that you see here is an earlier and Chinese sort of influenced style of architecture. This is in the, by the way, Golden Gate Park, San Francisco. You see how ornate this stuff is with these carvings right here and here on the structural members. Showing style architecture, I should have said before, is a quite stripped down, simplified, very elegant architecture without a lot of ornament. And then when you do T-style showing architecture, you start to see a lot more materials left in their natural state, bamboo, natural round poles that have just been carefully stripped of their bark and so forth. Handled very elegantly and in a refined way, but it's very, the materials are meant to look very modest, not showy, not embellished, not ornate. This is more ornate. But I wanted to show you the Kara Hafu up there. I'll get to Hafus in a second. A couple more ornate gates. This is an imperial gate in Kyoto at the palace, and you can just see. Sorry about that. You can just see all this metal work here. Very ornate. Not quite what we call like Japanese Baroque, but sort of heading in that direction. This is an interesting gate in Kyoto, but also has a lot of carving and so forth. A little more ornate, but this one's kind of a hybrid. So in terms of materials for these gates, let's talk about the roofs. The ones that I have in mind have roofs, and most gates, I don't know what the percentage would be, but most gates in Japan have roofs. There's certainly gates without roofs, and I'm talking, just let's shelve torii gates because they don't have roofs. But gates in gardens, gates at residences, gates at tea houses, and aside from the little Chuman bamboo gates, most of them have roofs. So let's talk about the roofs. The materials for the roofs, there's 5 or 6 common materials used. This one here at Katsura, this is shingle. This would probably be hinoki, could be sugi shingle. Those are Japanese woods that are commonly used in kind of architecture we build, kind of structures we build. Shingle, another shingled roof. This is at the Portland Japanese Garden. I'm not sure. I think this might have been built by Dale Brotherton. Those would be Western red cedar shingles. A really cool gate on the way to Todaiji in Nara. This is also shingle, but very thin, like wafer thin shingles, applied really in a very thick way. That's a pretty fancy gate, even though it's very simple at the same time. More shingles here. This is a gate in Berkeley that Paul Disco did with a lot of moss growing on, I think this might be redwood bark. Have you checked it out very closely? I think it might have been redwood bark. In Japan, you might see sugi bark. Sugi is often called Japanese cedar. It's cryptomeria. Thatch is not uncommon. This is a Paul Disco gate at Larry Ellison's residence. Pretty thick thatch of probably, I don't know if it was actually, in Japan, I think it's typically miscanthus, which is a grass. This was done by some Scottish thatchers, so I'm not sure what they used. Ceramic tile, quite common. These beautiful silvery gray tile, Kawara. This is the Portland Japanese Garden, the main gate. And from above, you can see these tiles. Here, that's all ceramic. A few more. Another type of roof we've already looked at this a little bit, but board and batten, just these are just wood planks with battens over the seams. Here's another. Those planks are, I think I remember them being 1.125 thick or so. There's no rafters below them. They are the roof, just those planks. But there's a lot of possibilities. This is just an illustration actually from Engel that I showed you earlier. This is a board-on-board roof. It's not actually on a gate, but you see this type on gates too, where it's not board and batten, where you have boards like this and then battens over the seams. It's board, and then board, and then board, like that. That's a board-on-board roof. Here's a lovely gate from our friend Lucas Benjamin, and I don't know how much Paul had to do with this design or not.
I think it was Paul's design.
Okay. This is a copper roof, and you may have seen Hiro-san. Did he do a demo today? Yesterday? Awesome. So this is a copper roof with a tile ridge. Very common combination. I should have shown this earlier, but just because it's so cool. This is Western Red cedar shingle. Not a great photo, but a cool gate. That's also at Larry Ellison's estate. Here's a little bit of copper detailing at the edge near the drip line, at the drip line. This is Todaiji, I think. Here's a cool combo of rafters. We'll get to rafters, but rafters, heavy, thick boards like we saw before and what looked like battens, and there might be battens in there, but this is a copper sheathed structure. And so you see these reflections, it's because it's copper. Yeah, that's a nice gate. And I think that might also be Dale Brotherton, not sure. A combination of a couple different kinds of roof is common. And if Hiro was here, I'd ask him what the name of this combination is. It means something like waist roof. It looks like this. And it is copper forming this waist and then ceramic tile in the center up to the ridge. And that's a really neat effect. I got to work with Hiro. Jamie, I think you left before we tore the gate apart, right? Yeah, but that gate, this was in Washington, D.C., had this style roof, copper waist, a copper waist, and then up at the ridge and in the center it was ceramic tile. Okay. I won't talk too much about the ridge treatments. Here's one. Often you'll have, this is a bark roof, by the way. You'll often have a visible ridge cap that's not really structural, and it's got often, can be straight up wood sometimes, but not that common. This will be wood that's clad in copper with a little end tile. If it were made of ceramic, it would be called an onigawara. But since it's not ceramic, I don't think it's called that. I don't know what it's called. So other structural, well, really getting into the structural members, I've mentioned a few already, but here's this basic design we came up with as a first draft. I'll be referring back to this. But it shows a bunch of structural members posts here, this little outrigger nuki here, we'll talk about that, this udegi, These are called keita. They carry the rafters. This is the structural ridge here, and the rafters terminate up there. And I'm just going to show you a bunch of examples of these different parts. So those outriggers here, these braces, they're called hikai. That's this little sub post or minor post, and then this nuki here.
Is there a side of the gate that those are usually on?
I haven't totally figured that out. A lot of it's really practical. Like if the gate's on a street, you put those on the inside. If there's a sidewalk there, keep them out of the way. Some gates have them on both sides because they might be on a garden path or something, and it doesn't affect anything to have them on both sides. You can see some right there. This one is what I'd call battered, the small minor post. These are the main posts here. The little minor post on the bracket is tilted, which is a cool effect. You can see these wedges here on top of the snooki. The snooki goes all the way through. It's one piece. Wedges, sometimes a peg right here, locking that in place. In this case, there's not another bracket here, so this doesn't go through the main post, but it's fully housed in the main post. Let's see if I can just do this. Here's that Paul Disco gate again at the Berkeley Botanical Garden, and here you do have the braces on both sides, and they're battered. And then you can even see the wedges. Don't know if they might have done pegs. That might be a peg, I'm not sure. I think it's just a knot. That's a beautiful, I love this gate. This is a cool gate. Detail of a wedge and a peg for that nuki going through that smaller post. I don't need to keep doing that. How about just a few different types of those, and we can refer to this too. This is what we call the udegi that goes all the way through up at the top, toward the top of the post. It's often wedged. I didn't draw that. The udegi, here's one. Here's one. This has a little boat bracket under it like we've drawn over here. That little bracket, in this case, in most of these cases, in fact, is mostly aesthetic rather than, it goes through that main post and everything. It's doing something, but it's not needed. More udegi, these with a little bit of carving. There's one. The joint for the udegi, so the udegi is going to hold up a structural header called a keita, and that keita is what, this is a keita here, drawn at half scale, or made at half scale, sorry. The rafters land, well, one would land here, and then across here. So that's the roof pitch of actually that gate, and the rafters will come right on this. So the udegi carries this keita piece, and rafters fall on that, supports the rafters. This would be the full width of the gate, this keita, on both sides. And then you have a ridge corresponding to that width, roughly, rafters landing up top on that ridge. But the joint, a very common joint, not always, for these is like this. So you have a tenon here going through often the keita, but not always. Sometimes it's wedged when it gets through, like here and here. think you may not be able to read it, but there's a wedge here, there's a wedge here on this one. And so, but other times there's not a through tenon. Other times the keta just sits on the udegi. Or it might be let into the udegi a little bit and lapped onto the udegi. That's also common. This is Paul's gate with the same kind of detail. You'll often find a little bit of lift, a little bit of curve on the bottom of an udegi because there's a tendency visually, not unlike looking up at a building that's quite tall and it looks like it's, you know, falling over, that it's not plumb when you're below it. And the Greek temple builders took stuff like that into account when they made their buildings, and they made the walls like this at the top and so forth, the columns. There's a visual illusion often when something like an arm like this is resting or coming through a post, either resting on it or coming through it. It looks like it's sagging a little bit. It's a weird thing, but I don't know if there's any examples around here. So one way to help that is to curve this a little bit. And in fact, the further back you draw this curve, I didn't draw it back very far, but the further back you pull it toward the post, the less of that sagging effect you'll feel or see. So you'll often see these curves more. That keta is sitting on top of that udegi, and so on. So another, I think I'm into, yeah. In addition to these rafters that you see the tails of here, sitting on our keta, like we said, udegi coming through. In addition to these rafters, though, there's often like a gable end, a barge board of some sort. It's called a hafu. We looked earlier at that kara hafu that was all curved at the Golden Gate Park gate. This is a little hafu here. Hafu come in different shapes. They're often curved either like this or like this, or sometimes you have a straight line on top and just a curve on the bottom like this. I'm going to just pull this over a little bit. So I originally drew this with just rafters, no hafu, and then I thought, well, it's kind of uninteresting. Let's make it more interesting. And so I made a hafu here. It's flat on top. It's curved at the bottom. This here is the hafu. And there are specific formulas for these curves. But you also have some freedom to tweak them, which I did. The reason this is a double line, this is a little bit of refinement here. It's a, how would you describe those, Jason? I forget the name, but it's, you take,
It's not quite a rabbit.
It's not a rabbit, but it's a little, you relieve this a bit. And it produces a nice little shadow line and accentuates that curve. There's a name for it, I forget, I'm sorry.
Recess?
What's that?
A recess?
Kind of. If you took a dovetail router bit, if you know what that is, router bit shaped like that, and you set your router with the base on the bottom of this hafu and just followed the curve, you would get this shape. Anyway.
It's a rabbit that's in at an angle?
Mm-hmm, kind of. Yeah.
What is that board you keep pointing at? For people who don't know. No, the whole plywood board.
Oh yeah, thanks, Jason. That's called a gensun, which I think literally means one sun. A sun is the unit of measurement corresponding kind of to our inch. There's 10 sun and what's almost a foot long, a shaku. So we often use boards like this in drawing and constructing, especially roofs. And it's for me, it's the best way to design once I've got a basic concept, because I can really, when you're working with small drawings, line thickness tricks your brain, and it's very hard to tell how things will really feel at scale. And so we make this, but we make it really accurate so that you can tell one of the carpenters, like, hey, go check the drawing. How big is that part? And they can go, okay. And they go, oh, that's, 3 3/4, and so on. And sometimes if you do it really accurately, I've even just put parts on this and done layout straight off this board. It's striking lines and stuff. So, it's a little bit like lofting in a way for boat builders, but totally different thing. But it helps you to A, to visualize things at scale, and B, then to refer to it and even use it for layout on pieces. So that's, again, a full-scale drawing, basically. So just a few more hafu, and then we'll move on here. Straight on top, curved on bottom. You see that varying portions of the horizontal rafter-bearing members, depending on the gate design. You can see a little bit of this here. You only see a tiny bit of our ridge down here. I don't know if you can even see it, but it's right there. Just end grain. You can come up and check it out later, but it's similar here. Actually, this has copper on it too, the end grain. Yeah.
Question about the curve. Is that
Yeah.
their formulas?
Yeah.
Or, how would you market these things out? You mark them by
Like
eye,
wh-
by eye, you draw them by
Oh,
eye,
like
or
mechanically,
tools
how do you do
and
it?
stuff?
Like bender boards and stuff. Yeah. But you have to, with the bender board, you have to finesse it, because that's a progressive curve. So you have to tweak one end more. You're not looking for an even. You want a fair curve, but not an even curve. So, yeah.
Is that curve just on the ends, or is each rafter in the middle curve
This just on the ends.
just on the ends?
However, in special cases where someone got creative, you might find curved rafters. Yeah. Here's a gate without a hafu, just this last piece here, just a rafter. But then on top of it, there's other pieces. This is a hirokomai type piece, getting into the weeds a little bit, with then a yodo. So that buildup is thick, right? So there's no hafu, which is thick. Here's a yodo on top of it. However, you still get this nice thick edge, and that's one of the key elements of, except in like really T-inflected gates. One of the main elements of Japanese architecture is you get this thickness of the edge of the roof. That's artificial in most cases. It's built up. And then inside the roof, like if you came back behind this first layer of shingle here, and then down in here, there's a void in there that's got rough rafters and so on. But that appearance of thickness at the edge is a key, it's a distinguishing mark of Japanese architecture, of the roof. Moving on. These rafters here on top of the rafters, you see these little battens. Those are called komai. Those are little battens that would carry roof boards, in this case running 90 degrees to them. So roof boards would be running parallel to these rafters. And so here are some roof boards like that. We replaced all these roof boards. These little boards are usually about 9 millimeters thick, sometimes even thinner. This roof had a leak and all the boards were rotted, so we replaced them. That's more of our braces. I think there's something I'm leaving out. No. Any questions about just these members? These are like really typical. You don't always have those komi.
Do these the proportions of these members, like correspond to the typical proportions in like a house?
That's a great question I was wanting to address, so thanks, Jamie. No, kind of, sometimes. So and that was on purpose because the gates are a little ambiguous in that they don't really fit. So in Japan, as in other places, there at some point sort of pattern books were developed and systems of proportion. Like, okay, take your main pillar or post of the house. It's n dimension. Your rafters are some specific portion of n, and so on and so forth. And everything is sort of laid out. However, there's variation there too because your rafters may change depending on snow load or wind load in a region, or there are regional differences. And these systems are called kiwari systems. That means literally like cutout or lumber division or something like that. Sorry, not cutout. Proportional lumber division. Cutout is kisamu. And I feel like the gates were sort of just left on their own, and their proportions harken back to those proportion manuals, but they don't always fit. One thing is a lot of gates, the gate we're doing, their site will help to determine some of their proportions. This gate's going in a forest of trees like this. Some of them are this big. The gate's a pretty small thing. It's not a big building with all this visual mass to it. It's pretty small, and if we had smaller posts next to those trees with no real visual mass, there's no walls on this gate. There's not even going to be doors on it. It would look pretty spindly. So a typical residential post size for showing architecture might be 4 5/8, anywhere. I mean, I've seen it 4 3/8. I've seen it 4 13/16. So somewhere between there, in that range. This is 5 inches, and that's what I found with gates that I've checked out, and not that many, but Japanese gates from designers I know are in Kyoto and so forth. Larger post size typically, unless it's a little tiny tea garden gate that's super lightweight, and that's just, I'm not really addressing that type of gate today. So this is 5 inches on this post, but then I'm not using the traditional proportional system to size my rafters. I'm doing what looks right to me. I want to stay within a certain range. Rafter aspect ratio side to side in the showing system is anywhere, I think, from like 1.1 to 1.25 to 1 to 1.625 or something like that. This one I think I'm doing 1 to 1.25. However, the proportion of that size to this would be way too small in a house. These are small rafters. Because when I tried with larger sizes, it just didn't look right. It looked like a house rafter. This little roof is really small. but I need a big post, so I just can't follow the traditional proportional system. And that's what I have found going around measuring stuff in Kyoto or Berkeley Botanic Garden. Those rafters are tiny and the chunky posts. It looks great, looks amazing, but so I'm glad you asked that, Jamie. Thanks. The other thing about the traditional Japanese proportioning system and modular system for almost all buildings. I don't know so much about the Shinto temples, but you often have posts on a 6-foot layout. Centers of posts 6 feet or half of 6 feet in some cases. But a 6-foot gate for our site, which I'll show you some pictures of the site, it's just way too wide. And if we ever want to put some doors on it, those would be almost 3 foot wide doors, which just look really silly. So I'm not doing posts 6 feet apart. These posts are like 5 feet apart, something like that. So gates are just kind of on their own, and they don't fall strictly under the proportional system. And I also feel like because of that, it gave carpenters some license to get pretty creative. So you'll find gates in Japan. Some of them are successful, some of them not so successful maybe, but where a lot of creativity went into expressing the tradition in a new way. And, that's always the thing, right, is I feel you should know the rules before you break them, and then break them artfully, So some of the pictures I showed you earlier were gates that were really, the carpenter felt a lot of freedom, which can be great, can be amazing. In terms of proportions, and we'll talk more about proportioning for a minute. The thickness of this piece here, maybe I can find a photo of the udegi. This isn't quite right, but this udegi is a little thin. But I used to make these a little bigger than I should have, I think. This thickness here, not this height, but the thickness. I tend to do it about half the width of the post. I used to do it a little bigger because I saw some that were big and I liked them, but then I realized I'm taking a whole lot of material out of that post if I take 50% of the width out to feed that udegi through nuki style. So I brought mine in to about 50, and similar comments apply to this nuki down here on the brace. I definitely thought a lot more about wind and snow load because this is not going on a site in California. It's going to be in Maine, and it's 70-mile-an-hour winds and could have 2 feet of snow on it at some point. So, is there a question? Oh, no. Fly.
And that one piece that goes straight through.
Yeah. And I haven't decided whether I want this to be just a single full housed piece, this little boat bracket, because I feel like I might be taking too much material out of that post. So I might do a real thin tenon and then kind of wedge those make these two arms separate with a tenon 15 millimeters or something through the post with some wedges or something. Install that piece first and then maybe the other. I haven't figured it out. Typical, by the way, post to ridge connection is just a bridle joint like this. I don't know if I can, yeah. So very simple. And then I think in this case, I haven't decided whether our rafters will be let into a mortise in the ridge or fly over the top on something like this. Those are all just things TBD. As I said, often wedge here, wedge or maybe two wedges here, wedge here, maybe it goes through, maybe it's two wedges coming from opposite directions. A lot of people make those wedges pretty steep. Maybe like if this were the wedge in there, you know, it might be I see some, you see the butt end of the wedge would be represented by the corner of my sashigane here. I see some like pretty steep like that. Have you seen that? Mm-hmm. And I always feel like I want it a little less steep. I make mine kind of not so extreme. Because I feel like at that steep, to get it to stay in there, you're really compressing a lot of material. It wants to come back out. It doesn't want to stay in there. It wants to relax. So I make mine a little less steep. So this, we can move on briefly, unless there's just more questions about structural issues and proportions and things. Yeah.
Could you speak on the post bases?
Oh yeah, thanks. So quite often, let's see if we can find one. Quite often, we will, I don't know if you can see this one, we will set the posts, scribe them on stone. Yeah, you can see a river rock there in the middle, sitting on the foundation, anchored to it with a post on it. So sometimes we will scribe the bottom of the post to a natural stone. That Paul Disco gate, this one, that's on natural stone. Excuse me, like that. It also has hardware hidden, going down into a footing of concrete, cement, whatnot. Other times we'll just put the post base on cut stone. And in more formal settings, you definitely will see cut stone. That Washington, D.C. gate where I showed you the Hirokomai was sitting, it was a part of, you can't see it, but it's really part of a wall system, this gate. It's ensconced in a wall. And it's a pretty formal site. And if you can see a little stone right here. There's a post that's part of this doorway, or it's on the opposite side actually of the gate. It's sitting on some cut stone. Yeah. So it can be either natural stone or cut stone. You know, you usually wouldn't see it on anything but stone. You don't see a post in the ground. That's a no-no. Sometimes you might have a post coming down with a big scarf joint into a stone complementary scarf joint. So the scarf joint's made up of part stone, part wood, which is pretty neat. Yeah, I didn't include a picture, but. So, oh yeah. Oh, sorry. How about you in front, and we'll get you.
I mean, this is probably an embarrassing question because I don't really know what I'm talking about. But what's up with all the wedges? How come we use so many wedges in this kind of building? Are they to keep things together, or to fudge mistakes, or it's just part of the design element, or like I'm just surprised by all the wedges that are used?
The wedges are act as fasteners, essentially.
So it's just a structural
Yeah.
strengthening thing.
Yeah, and you can see again, I showed some earlier, but pegs. So
Finish on the pegs, and on the wedges.
they're further, So there are some structures where the wedge is the only thing keeping that horizontal member in place, but here the registration offered by that peg is important. But there's not a wedge here. You don't have to have one. This may even have. Sometimes we're also in California. We're used to hiding structural screws and stuff because of earthquake. So we do all the traditional joinery and then some. But I love the wedges because they look amazing. They also do something, so it's not just superfluous fun,
Oftentimes, like when there's a horizontal member with a wedge above or below it, like inside that post that it's crossing, there's maybe a cog or a sloping surface. So the mortise is taller than the member, so you can go above the cog, slide in, and then there's a notch in your beam, comes down, and then the wedge just ensures it doesn't lift up. And then as long as it doesn't lift up, it can't shift side to side.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Yeah.
When you build a gate like these you've been showing us, do you prefab them in the shop and just assemble them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most of them are simple enough, although some are not. But where we don't even assemble them in the shop, we use this. We also use story poles that are very precise, and we trust that system. But for more complicated stuff, we might assemble in the shop first. But yeah, do the cutout in the shop. Mill it, cut it out, carefully protect it, and ship it to site. Go there, and so when we do this class this fall, we'll cut it all out here. Hopefully, we'll finish all the cutout. I think we will, and then we can't put it up in the fall, really. There's not time, but then winter happens and you can't even get to the site, which I'll show you. So we'll store it over the winter and then take it to the Morgan Bay Zendo, which looks like this. So the Morgan Bay Zendo is a pretty early Zendo in the US. It was like 1971. I think the stuff at Tassajara was 67 started. So it's a pretty neat place. And the community there is still going, and it's up in Surrey, Maine. This is the little pathway down to the Zendo from a parking lot up on the road, and in the winter you don't really want to go down that path unless you get a fresh snow, and you can go through that, but it gets pretty icy and treacherous and stuff. So it's a seasonal Zendo. And off to the left here, just past this bridge, there's this beginning of a trail which goes through here into a moss garden. And the moss garden used to be really well cared for when the Zen community there was like let's say in the late 70s, just thriving, all kinds of people interested in Zen, all kinds of practitioners and so forth. It's not like that today. So consequently that moss garden, which is quite beautiful and has some sculpture in it and stuff, and it's a meditation stroll garden for Zen practice. It could use some love, and so I thought, well, let's try to bring some attention to it and get the community to know it's there again and become interested in it. And so we'll probably do a fundraiser for the wood and stuff and try to get the community involved with it. And the other aspect of this, when we put this up, will hopefully be that it's a kind of, in a very mild sense, a meditation work retreat kind of situation for 3 or 4 days. Nothing too intense or heavy. Just do a mindfulness exercise with a woman called Nancy Hathaway who teaches here in the morning time, and then go to work building a beautiful gate. And I'm hoping that would be next spring before they really start their summer programming and so forth. So, yeah, I don't know if I have a picture of the depths of the moss garden. I don't think I do. Inside this rather creative and rather 70s Zendo building is actually a pretty, that one, a surprisingly traditional setup for Zen meditation with tan and tatami mats and the whole deal, and a drop ceiling and a lot of stuff you would traditionally find in a Zendo. And it was built by the Zen, just people who didn't know much about doing it, but they knew they needed a Zendo, and so it's a pretty cool accomplishment, actually. Any other? Yeah.
Can you talk at all about gates and like door
Oh,
design,
yeah.
how that relates to gate structure?
Yeah, thanks. Something I skipped over. A lot of times these will have doors, but often not. It depends on their location and if they really do need to use it to kind of, we're closed now, you know. Many of them, what I have found of this small scale type gate in a residence or garden, even though there are doors, so they're often swinging doors on hinges, but especially true as a feature, which I love a lot. And it's part of that whole aspect of the gate drawing you in. Even if you can't actually get in at the time, they often have a screen or grid through which you can see. Even if the door is quite tall, they still want to afford a view of what's beyond the gate. That's very common. In urban settings where you have like an urban, like a machiya, like urban minka house, like where there might have been a merchant downstairs whose family lived upstairs, you might have a gate for its sort of business door, which has sliding doors with a grill, through which it would be kind of hard to break through, and no one would be breaking through it anyway. I mean, part of the reason these gates don't have to be high security is the crime rate in Japan is pretty low, and it's enough just to, in most cases, just to close a gate to keep people from going through it. Locking it's often not even necessary. So, but affording a view into the precinct beyond the gate is really common. Any other? Yeah.
Have you thought about which species?
So, for this one, I think we just finalized that yesterday. I think it'll be Port Orford cedar mostly. And so some of it, the ceiling boards could be like Western red cedar or something. The other possibility was thuya. Alex and I talked a little bit about that. But I think I'm going to ship out some Port Orford cedar. Yeah. So I felt like this is a special gate. It's worth using some special wood on. Yeah.
Where do you get your POC from?
This is just a stash that I had in California. It came from near Coos Bay, Oregon. Yeah. Did you? Anyone else? Well, thank you so much. I don't know how much time we have or if there's other questions, but I'm happy to talk as long as you guys want. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.